Well, welcome to Topic 1, an Introduction to Statistics. So what is statistics? That's what we're going to talk about. And then we're going to talk about a couple of really basic concepts. So statistics, it's a science that involves the extraction of information from data obtained during an experiment or from a sample. It involves the following. We have to design an experiment or have some sort of sampling procedure, collect and do an analysis of the data, and then after we've done that, we'll make inferences or statements about the population based on the information in the sample we took. So putting it another way, statistics is a science of reasoning with data. We collect, organize, summarize, and analyze information so that we can draw conclusions or answer questions. So we'll talk about a process of statistics. So I'll make it 4 steps. The first thing is identify what we're trying to answer. So identify a research objective. What questions are we going to want answered? Then what group should be studied? And we'll find out the group to be studied is what we call the population. Then in that population, we're going to have to figure out what attribute of the individuals in that population will answer our question or questions. Once we determine all that, then we can collect the information needed. Now, can we access the entire population? Well, if we can't, we'd have to get a good sample. And how we get that sample, we have to think about our situation. Now, once we collect the information needed, we then have to organize and summarize that information. So we have descriptive statistics. There are visual methods such as charts and graphs and numerical methods where we do calculations. So once we have our data summarized, then we have to go from our sample data and draw conclusions from that information. We call that inferential statistics. Now, various methods are appropriate for different questions and different types of data sets, and that's what we'll be learning. As we said, we'll have a group of people that we go to called the population. The population will consist of what we call individuals, the group we go to answer the question that we have or questions. And of course, it's from those individuals we'll collect data needed from our group. The data that we collect are attributes of these individuals, and these attributes are what we look into. Now, individuals may be people, animals, or things. So when we talk about the individuals, we look at a variable or variables depending on whether or not we have more than one question to answer, or if our question needs more than one variable to answer it. One more characteristic of the individuals. So a variable is a characteristic we are specifically looking at to help us answer our questions and or collect data needed. So they can be any characteristic of the individual. It can take on different values for different individuals. So when we're collecting data, of course, we have to look at these variables, examine distributions of the variables we just collected. Now there are different types of variables. We talk about categorical and quantitative. So for categorical variables, we do things like bar graphs, pie charts, frequency and relative frequency distributions when we want to look at the distribution. For quantitative variables, we can do things like frequency and relative frequency distributions also, histograms, stem plots, dot plots, box plots, time plots. There's a bunch. Probability plots, and we'll learn about those. But these are methods where we can look at the distribution. Then we will do quantitative measures to find measures of center and spread to get an idea what is happening with our particular variable. So let's take a look. This science of reasoning with data. So what is data? Data is the collection of values of a set of characteristics, these variables for a set of individuals. And it's collected for whatever study that we're doing. So let's look at this. So you give out a survey, and these are the questions that you ask. First and last initial, gender, state of birth, number of years with present employer, and profession. And so people will answer it, so you give it to employees. When you get your data, when you collect the data from this questionnaire, it's going to look like this. It's going to be a jumble of letters and words and numbers. So we have to have a commonality when we look at this and we say, okay, this is what we call our data set. In that data set, each row is a single observation from a particular individual. The columns in here are the variables, those characteristics that were important to us. Now we can look at a single observation, such as this, coming from the state of Alabama, that particular individual was born in Alabama. And we try to make sense of these distributions, the distribution of state of birth, the distribution of gender, the distribution of the number of years at their particular employer, current employer. Statistics involves the collecting, organizing, summarizing, and analyzing information to draw conclusions or answer questions. So we have this population we talked about, more specifically the group to be studied, the group that will answer our question, and it's going to include all individuals in the group. Generally, we don't have access to the full population, or it would be too expensive to get what is called a census. So we get a sample. That's a subset of the population. It's often used in analysis because getting access to that population, as we said, is somewhat impractical. So descriptive statistics are statements about the sample, organizing and summarizing the information. Inferential statistics then generalizes what we got from the sample and makes statements about the population. So exploring data, we begin by examining each variable by itself. Then we move to studying relationships among variables. We begin with graph or graphs, and then we add numerical summaries of specific aspects of the data. So we look at data. We can have univariate data set. Those are observations from a single variable, such as the GPA of all Stat 400 Fall 2020 students at the start of the semester. Bivariate data are observations. They're made on two variables from an individual or unit. We study if there's a relationship, and we could say something relationship between height and weight. Now, multivariate data set observations are made on more than one variable from an individual or unit. Bivariate data is a special case of multivariate. So let's say a study was if there is a relationship between weight and the diastolic and systolic blood pressure. Distribution, the variable, value, and how often or the percentage of time it occurs. We can study a distribution visually, graphically, or we can study the distribution numerically with numerical summaries. So this idea of a distribution, the variable, value, and how often it occurs is extremely important. Now there are different types of study. We have enumerative. They focus on a fine, identifiable, unchanging collection of individuals or objects that make up the population. A sampling frame, a listing of the individuals or objects to be sampled, is needed. An analytic study is a study that is not enumerative in nature, taking action on an existing process. There is no sampling frame. So this is just an introduction briefly into what statistics is. So we've looked at a few very important definitions and ideas in statistics, and we'll be working through and learning about how we deal with distributions and how we can get our questions answered through statistics. So we went through some basic definitions, a first look at what's involved in statistics and the difference between population and sample. Thanks so much for watching.